President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces, Minister of National Defense Abdelmajid Tebboune has chaired at the Houari Boumediene Military Academy in Cherchell the graduation ceremony of the 2023-2024 year. The Israeli occupation have bombarded several areas of the Gaza Strip after having ordered the population of Khan Younis to evacuate the southern region. The president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, has announced resumption of discussions with the United States less than a month before the presidential elections on July 28th. Those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. The President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces, Minister of National Defense Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired at the Houari Boumediene Military Academy in Cherchell the graduation ceremony of the 2023-2024 year. Majid Mila has the details.
The ceremony took place in the presence of senior state officials and senior officers of the People's National Army. Earlier, the President of the Republic arrived at the academy where he was welcomed by Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Saïd Chengriha. The President of the Republic subsequently reviewed a detachment of the AMP which honored him and listened to the national anthem. He also paid tribute to the memory of the late President Houari Boumediene, whose name is borne by the Military Academy, and laid a wreath of flowers at the memorial stone. On this occasion, the Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Saïd Chengriha, said Algeria was and still is a security and stability actor in its geopolitical environment thanks to her peaceful orientations and her principles consisting of good neighborliness and cooperation without interference in the state's internal affairs. He added that the National People's Army is relentlessly working on developing all its components to guarantee a life of dignity and development to Algerian people.
The Israeli occupation army today bombarded several areas of the Gaza Strip after having ordered the population of Khan Younis to evacuate the southern region. Palestinian sources said at least 10 Palestinians were killed and scores of others wounded in the Israeli bombardments, which targeted Khan Younis and its surrounding, causing the population to flee. Several other sectors of Gaza, including the northern town of Rafah and the central part of the Palestinian territory, were also hit by the Israeli attacks. In this respect, UNRWA affirmed that about 250,000 people were concerned by the evacuation order issued yesterday by the Israeli occupation. The UN agency denounced the conditions of the displaced as well as the severe restrictions imposed by the Israeli occupying authorities to the entry of aid, making the humanitarian response impossible. In this connection, the spokesperson for the UN Secretary General, Stéphane Dujarric, affirmed that the much-needed humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian population was facing restrictions imposed by the Israeli occupying authorities, making it difficult for the UN mission to enter the territory. Addressing a press briefing, he had the following.
OCHA reports that during the entire month of June, Israeli authorities facilitated less than half of the 115 planned humanitarian assistance missions to northern Gaza. More than a third were impeded, nearly 10% were denied access, and about 9% were cancelled due to logistical, operational, or security reasons. Meanwhile, our humanitarian colleagues warned that the unexploded ordnance continues to pose a significant risk to the lives of people all across Gaza. That includes internally displaced people and people trying to return to areas from whence they came. Children are particularly at risk, and as an example, on Saturday, a 9-year-old girl was reportedly killed and 3 others injured by unexploded ordnance in an area south of Khan Younis.
Evoking the protection of the civilian population and, as he put it, the deadly circular movement that the population has to undergo, he had this to say.
It just shows yet again that no place is safe in Gaza. That more efforts need to be made to protect civilians. It's another stop in this deadly circular movement that the population in Gaza has to undergo on a regular basis. This is yet again why we need to see an end to this conflict. We need to see a humanitarian ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and which would lead to our ability to distribute aid quickly to all those who need it.
The UN has been denouncing as disastrous the condition of the 2.4 million inhabitants of Gaza are confronted to since the Israeli occupation army launched its attacks nearly 8 months ago. Let's recall that the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the reconstruction efforts will be examined today during a special meeting of the UN Security Council.
The spokesperson of
The Palestinian Prisoners Club has said that the Israeli entity used civilians, including detainees, as human shields throughout its occupation of Palestine. A communiqué issued by UEFA indicated that the videos of the Israeli forces' use of citizens as human shields constitute an extension of an old and renewed approach and represent an aspect of ongoing genocide aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza, who daily reveal the truth about the occupation. It stressed that since the beginning of the genocidal aggression, the level of crimes committed against detainees and their families has been of unprecedented intensity, and it is also confirmed by the testimonies of hundreds of detainees and released prisoners. The AJO, Adamir, had previously indicated that over the past decades, the Israeli occupation authorities have systematically resorted to worse forms of torture against the Palestinian prisoners and detainees in their jails from the first moments of their arrests. The spokesperson of the UN Secretary General, Stéphane Dujarric, has said that there have been discussions with officials from South Lebanon on the current situation amid ongoing exchanges of fire along the Blue Line and the severe impact on the local population. Assia Bekar has more details in this report.
The spokesperson of the UN Secretary General, Stéphane Dujarric, said UN peacekeepers are working towards a cessation of hostilities.
Our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that the head of the UN peacekeeping mission, General Haroldo Lazzaro, went over the weekend to meet with 13 mayors of the Al-Khala Union representing communities in southwest Lebanon. That visit took place in Tibnin, in sector west of the peacekeeping mission. They discussed the current situation amid ongoing exchanges of fire along the Blue Line and the severe impact on local population. Since October 8, 2023, several villages, as you know, in southern Lebanon have suffered severe damage. General Lazzaro underscored UNIFIL's commitment to working towards the restoration of a cessation of hostilities under the framework of Resolution 1701 and stability and security for the people of Lebanon. And as a reminder, the hostilities, as you know, have on both sides of the Blue Line have impacted tens of thousands of people.
Let's recall that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said earlier that he was profoundly concerned by escalating tensions between the Lebanese movement Hezbollah and the Israeli occupation, stressing that UN peacekeepers are working to calm the situation and prevent miscalculation. Guterres told reporters that one miscalculation could trigger a catastrophe that goes far beyond the border and beyond imagination, stressing that the people of the region and the people of the world cannot afford another catastrophe.
The president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, has announced a resumption of discussions with the United States less than a month before the presidential elections on July 28th. President Maduro said that the talks will resume next Wednesday with the United States to ensure that it respects the agreement signed in Qatar and reestablishes the terms of dialogue with respect and without manipulation. The president stressed that Washington was behind a proposal to resume negotiations and that Caracas accepted the offer after 2 months of reflection. He added that the two parties would discuss and look for new agreements to ensure that everything, notably the agreement signed in Qatar last September, is respected. Venezuela and the United States began secret negotiations last year in Qatar. President Maduro said he wanted dialogue, understanding, a future for their relations, change under absolute sovereignty and independence. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed hope that Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan will settle their border disputes peacefully. More details in this report by Assia Bekar.
During a meeting with Kyrgyzstan's president in Bishkek, Antonio Guterres praised Kyrgyzstan's positive experience in settlement of territorial disputes with neighboring countries, noting the successful demarcation of the border with Uzbekistan last year. Guterres said he was convinced that the border question with Tajikistan will be resolved peacefully and diplomatically through negotiations, highlighting the complexity of the demarcation of borders in the Fergana Valley, where the borders are nested like a puzzle, as he put it. The border between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan extends for some 980 kilometers. Negotiations on the demarcation and mapping of the border have been progressing since December 2002. More than 90% of the borderline is currently settled and mutually recognized, with the remaining sections being disputed. This unresolved issue has given rise to numerous conflicts involving local residents and military personnel from both republics. Let's note that Kyrgyzstan shares borders with China, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, but only the border with Tajikistan remains uncertain in terms of delimitation and demarcation.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. New anti-government protests took place in Kenya, where police dispersed gatherings using tear gas in the center of the capital, Nairobi. Launched mid-June on social media with a strong echo among young people against the government draft budget introducing new taxes, turned into a national movement of mistrust towards the government. Following the third day of gathering on June 25th, where protesters who stormed the parliament were killed by the police, who fired live ammunition into the crowd, President Ruto announced the next day that he was withdrawing the draft budget and said he was ready to open a dialogue with the youth. Let's recall that the Kenyan president announced on Sunday that protests resulted in the death of 19 people, according to the information provided by his secret services, adding that it should not be the case under democracy and that he had no blood on his hands. According to the official Human Rights Protection Agency, 39 people died since the first demonstration on June 18th. The number of children displaced by gang violence in Haiti has increased by 60% since March, the equivalent of one child per minute, has warned UNICEF, estimating the number of children concerned at 300,000. The United Nations Fund for Childhood said that the displaced children represent more than half of the 600,000 people who have been forced to flee their usual residences due to the endemic violence in the country, particularly in the capital, Port-au-Prince. The UNICEF Director General Catherine Russell said in a statement that the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our eyes is having a devastating impact on children. Displaced children desperately need a safe and protective environment, as well as increased international community and financial support. The 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA, has unanimously adopted a resolution proposed by China and co-sponsored by more than 140 countries aimed at consolidating international cooperation on building artificial intelligence capabilities. Majid Mila has the details.
The resolution consolidating international cooperation on building artificial intelligence capabilities emphasizes that the development of artificial intelligence should adhere to the principles of being human-centered, promoting beneficial intelligence and benefiting humanity. It encourages international cooperation and concrete actions to help countries, particularly developing countries, build their artificial intelligence capabilities, improve their representation and global artificial intelligence governance, advocate an open, fair and non-discriminatory trading environment, and to support the United Nations in its central role in international cooperation. The resolution aims to achieve inclusive, beneficial and sustainable development of artificial intelligence, thereby contributing to the achievement of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
The U.S. National Hurricane Center said that Hurricane Beryl, which is sweeping across several islands in the southeast Caribbean with devastating rain and extreme winds, has become more intense a few hours after upgrading the storm to Category 5, the highest category on the weather scale. The Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Mr. Simon Still, said the climate crisis is pushing disasters to new record levels of destruction. He warned that the climate crisis, which is going from bad to worse faster than expected, in response requires far more ambitious climate actions by governments and businesses. The UN executive stressed that whether it was his homeland of Carriacou, Grenada, now hit by Hurricane Beryl, or the heat waves and floods that are battering communities in some of the world's largest economies, it was clear that the climate crisis is pushing disasters to new record levels of destructions. That's it for today's news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to a special program devoted to Souka Khalas. Stay tuned on radio to the 3 Jamilas, followed by a new program on Souka Khalas. Stay tuned on Radio Algeria International.
Hello and welcome to this special program in which we pay tribute to 3 of the most well-known female freedom fighters of the national revolution for Algeria's independence, namely Jamila Bouazza, Jamila Bouhired and Jamila Boupasha. All are well known as the 3 Jamilat. First, let's start with the story or the history of Algerian colonization and independence, which is itself a tortuous path. French soldiers invaded and gained control over northern Algerian cities in 1830. To strengthen its hold on Algeria, the French government gave large amounts of land to European settlers who became known as colons, enabling them to gain control over most of Algeria's economy. As a further incentive, all non-French settlers were granted immediate French citizenship. Algerians resisted French domination, but on the eve of World War I, France had colonized all of Algeria. By the eve of the revolution, Algerian demands for the even limited political and civil rights had been repeatedly rebuffed by the French colonial regime and the nearly 1 million European settlers in the country. The only possible solution was armed conflict, which broke out on All Saints' Day, or the 1st of November 1954. Thus began one of Africa's cruelest anti-colonial wars, an immense human tragedy that endured for 8 long years, one whose consequences are still felt today in Algeria and France. Fighting was mainly in the form of guerrilla operations in rural areas. Depending upon where they lived, city or village, and their level of education, Algerian women participated in the struggle in 3 capacities. Rural women either joined the Army of National Liberation or the National Liberation Army, ALN, or provided food, provisions and havens for the freedom fighters. About 80% of the women who actively participated resided in the countryside. In cities, they joined the National Liberation Front, FLN, or served in support capacities. Jamila Bouhired, who was recruited in 1956 for the FLN by her older brother, also became a cause célèbre after her arrest in 1957 for carrying a bomb. So these 3 women were eventually released due to international pressures from human rights groups and French intellectuals, but only after terrible suffering. Algerian nationalists carried out numerous bombings, assassinations and raids against colons and French military forces in Algeria. In retaliation, French soldiers destroyed crops and orchards and herded Algerians into concentration camps, torturing nationalist leaders. As Mani Al-Azraq's research shows, the urban women who participated in the nationalist struggle were very often young, middle-class graduates of French lycées or high schools, such as Jamila Boupasha and Jamila Bouhired. They were particularly important during the Battle of Algiers, which took place in 1957 and was later immortalized by Italian filmmaker Gillo Pontecorvo in his 1967 film La Bataille d'Alger. French-educated women who had never worn the traditional veil adopted it as a military strategy in order to carry bombs, money or messages from one zone to another of Algiers without being detected. A number of women were captured by the French police or army, imprisoned and subjected to horrible torture, as was Jamila Boupasha, who was raped. Louisa Irir Lahriz, who joined the FLN after her father was seized by colonial authorities, was also imprisoned, tortured and raped in Algiers' notorious Barbarossa prison in 1957. French police arrested Jamila Boupasha in 1961 after accusing her of throwing a bomb at a cafe near the University of Algiers. Guards at two different Algerian prisons in the Upper El Bier and Hussein Dey tortured her with electric shock, cigarette burns, kicks and rape during her imprisonment. The sadistic treatment Boupasha and other Algerian prisoners suffered turned many French citizens and human rights activists around the world against the French in their fight to retain their Algerian colony during the Algerian War for Independence. The government released Jamila Boupasha after Algeria declared its independence from France in 1962, and even her torturers were also released in a general amnesty. Jamila Boupasha was born into a middle-class family, the daughter of a well-off businessman. Her parents were French citizens and they sent their daughter Jamila to school in France. She attended a French vocational school in preparation for becoming a seamstress. The Algerian War for Independence cut her studies short, however. Like many young educated Algerians, Jamila Boupasha became involved in the nationalist uprisings. Her arrest, imprisonment and torture coincided with French intellectuals' call for an end to the war and to the use of barbarism against the enemy in wartime. The philosophers Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, André Breton and actress Simone Signoret issued their manifesto of the 121, and the historian Pierre Vidal-Vaquet pilloried torture as an embarrassing break with France's liberal tradition in his book Torture in the Republic, released in the 60s. Gisèle Halimi, Boupasha's defense attorney, teamed up with Simone de Beauvoir to write a book about her client in 1962. Ms. Halimi paints an intriguing portrait of this middle-class French education young woman. She describes Boupasha as a compelling, honest and frightened young girl. A group of French intellectuals, moved particularly by allegation of the French military sexual brutality against women and by racist acts during the Algerian War for Independence, formed the Jamila Boupasha Committee. The committee launched a public opinion campaign to defend the civil rights of Jamila. This group included the lawyer Gisèle Halimi, Simone de Beauvoir, French intellectuals such as François Mauriac and even Germaine Tillon. In the meantime, Jamila Boupasha became famous, and a portrait by Pablo Picasso painted her on the cover of Jeune Afrique magazine in the 60s still. The second Jamila is Jamila Bouhired, who is a nationalist who opposed the French colonial rule here in Algeria. She was also raised in a middle-class family, having attended a French school. She would go in her youth to join the Algerian National Liberation Front while a student activist. There, she worked as a liaison officer and personal assistant of FLN commander Youssef Saadi here in Algiers. Despite having been educated in French school, Jamila Bouhired was drawn to the revolutionary cause. Her brothers having already been involved with the underground nationalist struggle, Jamila was quick to join, and her profile would quickly rise in stature. During the revolution, she worked as a liaison agent, and due to her good looks and European appearance, she was a valued asset to the revolutionary cause, as she could easily move around Algiers, passing through roadblocks without raising any suspicion. However, in June 1957, she was captured in a raid and accused of planting bombs in French restaurants, thus responsible for many deaths in Algiers. After considerable torture, she was tried, convicted and sentenced to death by guillotine in July 1957. At that time, a French lawyer, Jacques Vergès, heard of her sentence and decided to represent her in what would be a historical trial. Jacques Vergès would wage a public relation campaign. Partly due to his strategy, the French government found itself under overwhelming pressure from the world's public opinion, and the execution was postponed indefinitely, and eventually Jamila Bouhired would be released. Jamila Bouhired and Jacques Vergès eventually married and would work together on Révolution Africaine, an Algerian magazine written in French and focusing on African nationalist revolutions. Nowadays, Jamila Bouhired resides in the capital of Algeria. That was a tribute to the three Jamilas, and through them to all Algerian women who contributed to fight injustice and colonialism like so many other women across the world.
The city of Souk Ahras in Algeria is the capital of the Souk Ahras province and is located in the border of Algeria and the neighboring Tunisia. It is a city that is home to a distinguished history and is associated with a famous figure, namely Saint Augustin of Hippo. The city is filled with the legacy of a settlement that once graced the site on which Souk Ahras was built, the remembrances of the Algerian War, and the bravery of the people of Souk Ahras who weathered the storms to create a quaint but successful place they call home. Before their complete extinction in 1930, Barbary lions once roamed freely in the dense forests surrounding the city, with the city being a well-known marketplace, also referred to as a souk. The city was christened Souk Ahras, meaning Market of Lions. Today, the magnificent forests can still be enjoyed, and even without the majestic king of the forest walking around, the forests are home to many wildlife species and breathtaking birds. Most people view the city merely as a stop en route to Tunisia, unaware of the heritage of the city. Long before the city was constructed, an ancient city by the name of Tagaste flourished here. And it is in this city that Saint Augustin of Hippo was born in the year 354. He went on to serve to the monastery of Tagaste, as did other well-known men such as Saint Alepius, Saint Firmus, and Saint Januarius. It is believed that the city of Tagaste was in existence until the year 600. Historians suspect that life in Tagaste was much like Souk Ahras is now. Bustling with markets selling leather, bread, wine, and fruit, with the forest supplying them with needed building materials and wood for hand-carved furniture. The city has grown into a vibrant industrial and agricultural center, with cattle farming, mining, and spectacular vineyards decorating the landscapes. For visitors who want to travel to Souk Ahras, there are a few noteworthy sites to visit, such as ancient Christian monuments and the basilica ruins that have been excavated. Mining and the railway has brought an economic boost for the city.